Hello everyone, my name is Pete Ascosi, and I'm Assistant Director of ChristLife. And for all those from the ChristLife conference, welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful time of dinner, and for those coming from the parish and otherwise, welcome tonight. Before our time of Eucharistic adoration, I have the privilege of introducing our speaker tonight. His name is Mick Souza. He's here with his lovely wife, Carla, and they both come from Middletown, Rhode Island. I first was acquainted with Mick when I saw his story on EWTN's Journey Home, where he shared an incredible story of his journey back to the Catholic Church, and also how his family was touched by ChristLife. And so he's an active member of his church, St. Barnabas. He's a former world bodybuilding champion and former Mr. Universe. And so let's give Mick a warm round of applause.
Pete, thank you. Dave, Lisa, Diane, thank you guys so much, making me feel like this is home. I can't say enough about the community here and how welcoming everybody has been to Carla and I. Really touched. I hope that my story makes you see that anybody can be up here in my shoes, because I'm like, I could be any one of you guys. By the grace of God, I'm still alive. I probably shouldn't be, and I most likely should be in hell. I was on my way there, and thankfully, I made a quick U-turn. Sometimes what you'll discover through my story is sometimes it takes the absolute worst times in your life for God to get your attention. When I was a little boy, at 3 years old, my father left. And it's a hard transition for a kid. I was raised in the 60s by a single mom whose father had just died and whose husband had just walked out on her. It was my brother and I, and we had nowhere to go, so we moved in with my grandmother. So at 3 years old, I found myself, I guess you'd say, with feelings of rejection, wondering where my father was, wondering how come I didn't see him anymore, and I used to run away. Where we live, there's beach and ponds, and I used to run away and go hide in the wreaths. And at 3 years old, I had already had police looking for me. So I became a delinquent real young in life. By 7 years old, my grandmother was a maid. So I went to the elementary school, and across a major street was a hotel. And my grandmother worked in the hotel. And my brother and I used to have to go across there after we'd get out of school, and we'd wait for my grandmother to get out of work. And we'd have to go around and hide in the back. So in the winter, one winter time, I was freezing cold. And my grandmother had her, the maid thing there. And there were bath mats made out of paper. So my brother and I were freezing, and I went and grabbed a couple of the bath mats. And back in the days, everybody smoked, so there was cigarette matches. So we went to the back, and we're trying to get warm as little boys and trying to stay as warm as we could. So I started a fire for us, and in about a minute and a half, I had a 400-acre fire, and in all points, people and firemen coming from all over the state of Rhode Island to put this fire out that I started. So at 7, my mom didn't have anything to do with us for the summertime when we were off of school. So she put us in a boys club camp. Boys club camps sometimes can be a thriving place for bad people. We used to have to change up in a tent and go swimming. One of the things that I discovered was one of the guys there was molesting the boys. And it was my turn tomorrow morning. So I remember not sleeping the night before because I was scared. So when my mother dropped me off, we used to have to go over a ferry. There were no bridges yet. We'd go on a ferry. And my mom dropped me off at the bus with my brother. And because we were two different ages, I went on one bus, my brother went on another one. I ran off of the bus, and I kept running because I was scared. I didn't want to get molested. I knew it was happening, and I'd been threatened. I was told that tomorrow was my day, and if I said anything, my family would get killed. So I was scared. When I was running through the streets at 7 years old, somebody picked me up and asked me what I was doing walking around the streets. And I asked him if I could get a ride to the hotel where my grandmother worked, and he said, sure. And I got in. He drove by the hotel, and he kept going. One good thing with Boys Club, we used to whittle. We all had little pocket knives, and I had my pocket knife. I was already starting to become a survivor. I was hiding in the reeds, and I spent overnight in the reeds before at 3 years old. And I ran away a lot. So I pulled my knife out, and I asked the guy to stop, and he didn't. So I stabbed him. He jammed his brakes on, pulled over, and he let me out with some choice words and a little bit of a beating. But he let me out, so I was okay. That's how my life started. That's the beginning of it. I was the youngest kid in the area growing up, and I used to get beat up all the time because I was the littlest, youngest guy. So I began to lift weights. What started happening, I'd come home, I'd have a fat lip, a black eye, bloody nose, whatever it be, and my mom would always say, don't go play with the older kids if you don't want to get beat up. You know what they're going to do. It's all good, right? Go play with the older boys, get beat up, you learn how to fight. That's what I did. As I began to start to lift weights, we didn't have money. So there'd be construction sites around, and I would go steal wood from the construction sites and do some makeshift, like make weights, make a bench out of some wood that we stole. As I started to get a little bit older, started to get a little more creative with the stuff that we were able to make and steal. There was a school up the street from us. It was a Christian school for boys getting ready to go to college, and they lived there, and they were rich, and we were poor. So one of the things that I did, I used to play Robin Hood. Only I didn't give to the poor, I was the poor. And I used to go to the school and steal stuff from the kids. At ground level, there was a window. And we used to go in there, and if the kids weren't in there, go into the window and steal things from them. And I don't know if my mom was dumb, and I don't think she was, or if she was just too busy doing her best to raise us. But every now and then, stuff would appear in the house, and she didn't know how the heck it got there, and I don't think she wanted to ask. Because it's like, that's a big problem for a woman in the 60s trying to grow up and raise a couple of kids. I kept fighting. I ended up from my lifting weights to doing really good in sports. And I turned my attention and my discipline to sports. I began doing really well in sports. I high jumped, I boxed. I was a semi-professional boxer for 3 years. I only lost one fight. I played basketball a little bit, but I didn't like team sports. I think because my father left at such a young age, I had trust issues. I think that'd be fair to say, right? So I didn't trust anybody. And even when it came to sports, I knew what I was willing to do, but I didn't know what the teammates were willing to do. So I stuck with the sports that I could do all by myself. I skateboarded professionally when I was a kid. I loved trying to do things that nobody had ever done. And so by the time I got out of high school, I had already had 4 knee surgeries. When I did graduate, again, no money. I wasn't going to college because I couldn't. So I figured I'd go in the Marines. At this point, I loved fighting. I began working in bars because the drinking age at the time was 18. And I could go in the Marines and serve my country. So the first day that I got there, they put me up, all of us up on a bench in your underwear. And they're looking us over, and I had scars on my knees. And they looked at my knees, and they're like, you know, what's that? And I said, I had 4 knee surgeries. Take a hike, you're a liability to us. And I'm like, a liability? I'm the guy you want, man. Come on. Nowhere to go. No relationship with my father whatsoever. My mom said to me, I was thinking of going to school. So she said to me, your father's never done anything for you guys, and you've never asked him for anything. Call him and ask him to give you a loan. I needed $500 to go to school. I was going to the cheapest school around, and I was just trying to plan B. Plan A was Marines. Plan B was let me go to school. When I called my father, I was scared. I'd been rejected. I knew that feeling already, and I didn't want it. But my mom really, wholly thought that he would give it to me. And I only asked him for a loan, but he said no. So I asked him if he would co-sign it for me, and I'd pay it back. And if he just would co-sign, I could go to school. And he said no. I ended up packing a bag. I had enough money to get a one-way ticket to California. Plan C. I'm going to go and meet the people that I admire most and learn from them in California. Well, I'd never been away from home, never been on a plane before, and I didn't have a hotel reservation. So the first night that I got there, I ended up sleeping in the garage of the gym because I didn't know anything about travel. I had never traveled before. The very first night that I got there, it was probably like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I put my gym bag on the ground and I slept on the cement floor there. And one of the first guys that came there, I recognized he'd won the Mr. USA contest. And he was on remember the show Charlie's Angels? He had been on Charlie's Angels the night before. And when he got there, he sees this kid laying on the ground sleeping at 4:30 in the morning, and he's laughing at me. What the heck are you doing? Where are you staying? I don't know. But I saw you last night on TV. How cool is that? So he invited me to train with him. So I did. After we trained, we went and grabbed a bite to eat, and after we talked for a little bit, he said to me that his wife had left, and he was living by himself, and he said to me, I'm doing some work on my house, and if you're willing to give me a hand, you're willing to stay with me. You're like, I'm in. So the first night, I'm there in the morning. Who's at the door? Arnold Schwarzenegger. Dream come true for an 18-year-old, right? So long and short, I ended up within like 36 hours, I was training with Arnold. So fortunately, I got to learn from the best. Unfortunately, I still needed to make money because there was no money to be had for me yet, right? I became good buddies. Anybody ever heard of the gang, the LA Crips? The guy that started it was one of my buddies. So there's work. It got old. It gets old. I come back home, back to Rhode Island, and I was working in the bars. And I began training some people because I had a lot more knowledge from the people that I was learning from. But not enough to pay rent and to have a car and things like that. So I continued to work the bars and stuff like that. Every now and then, people with suits come into the bars. And for me, at 18 years old, broke and dumb, people that wore suits were good people. They got money, you don't. They probably have something that you don't know, right? They got an education and you don't. And when they offer you work, you take it. I was growing up with a real good work ethic. You know, no money, no food. That's motivating. So the first gig that I got from them was they were turning a crack house into an inn. There were 8 apartments in it, and it was loaded with crack people, crackheads, filled. And my first job was to get them all out and keep the house empty, and they got a room for me to be in there. So my average night, they'd climb up the fire escape, kick the windows in, break in, and I'd have to fight with 5 or 6 guys every night, the average night. But I got paid. So it's not all bad, right? I got a free place to stay. I got a new truck. I had a brand new Toyota pickup truck at the time. And they got other gigs for me. Because they wore suits, I thought they were good guys. Well, I think when you light cars on fire, break in somebody's house and hurt them, you're probably not working for the right guy. Young and dumb, I didn't know. I thought I was working for the good guys. Innately, I knew that I was doing things that were wrong. I didn't have any way out, though. I'm not justifying it. Don't think that I am, because it was wrong. I had nowhere to turn. I began to do better in my bodybuilding career. God gave me the gift of discipline. I recognize that today. Back then, I thought it was me, and I just got a good work ethic. I realize today that it's a grace of God that He's given me of discipline. I always got up extremely early in the morning and trained. All the sports that I did that I got really good at and won lots of trophies at, It was because I had the discipline to work my butt off really hard and achieve. That's a gift from God. In hindsight, I didn't know that. As I started getting better, I won everything from the Mr. Rhode Island to the New England to the East Coast to the Mr. America. And I started doing better, and I was finally starting to get to a place where I was making a little bit of money. Again, my mom had a tough life raising the two of us. The house wasn't ours. There was always the threat in the back of our mind that I was bad, my brother was a good guy, that we may get kicked out. Because sometimes when I got in trouble, I could hear my grandmother yelling at my mom that we're going to have to leave. And that threat of getting kicked out of the house and not having anywhere to go was scary for me. But you do what you got to do, right? You don't have any choice. So in the meantime, I'm trying my best to be on my own. I took off when I was 18 years old, back and forth to California. My titles are starting to add up, and I'm starting to get some good gigs. I'm doing guest appearances here and there, and I'm starting to make a little bit of money. Still not enough, though. After I won the America, the next step was to go to Mr. Universe over in London. So the very first year that I went, there were about 150 guys in my class, and my goal was to crack the top 10. And thankfully, I came in 7th place. Back home, back to the drawing board, more working, use the discipline God gave me. And I'm getting ready again. I'm about 6 weeks out. And literally, and I am not exaggerating, to the day, today, 32 years ago, I got a phone call. One that would literally change me for the rest of my life. My mom had a heart attack. She was everything. Went to the hospital, and supposedly she was okay. And I thought everything was going to be okay. When the doctor was talking to my brother and I, there was, you know what a code blue is? It's not good news. My mom coded. And she had already coded 6 other times, and they brought her back. I knew what it meant. And when she coded, the doctor took off, and he said to me, at this stage of the game, if I can't get your mom back within about a minute and a half, she's going to be brain dead for the rest of her life. So I literally watched the clock. And at a minute and a half, I literally went into the operating room where they were operating on her. And the doctor's like, whoa, you can't be in here. And I said, I can't not be in here. And as a nurse stood in front of me, she started, and I said, please, I don't want to put my hands on you, but I'm going to be here with my mom right now. And there's nothing you can do to get me out of here. So please don't try, because I don't want to touch you. And she just put her hands up, and she said, I warned you. The doctors told me that she could hear me. So I knelt down and held her hand. My brother was bipolar, and my grandmother had just had a stroke. And my mom was taking care of my grandmother. And she watched over my brother. My brother lived home for his whole time, okay? After my mom, I talked to my mom and I said to her, I'm Portuguese. Vove. Anybody know what Vove is? Grandma. Vovó. I knelt down, I held my mom's hand, and I'm watching the lines. They told me she could hear me. And I said to her, Mom, if you need to go home and rest, I'll feed Vove, and I'll take care of her. And I'll take care of Biggie. That's my brother. And if you need to rest, go. And the lines went straight. I stood up, and I hugged the doctor, and I thanked him. And he pushed me back, and he said to me, I just lost your mom. And I said, no, you brought her back 7 times. You're getting in God's way. You told me that my mom could hear me, and she heard what she needed to hear. I don't know, you guys remember Hurricane Bob. It was a big hurricane on the East Coast. It was 32 years ago today. That's the day my mom died. While they were operating on it, the electric was going out. And it kept going out, and I'm in the operating room, and it's pitch black. And then 30 seconds later, the lights are on again and they could work again. I asked the doctor to just disconnect my mom from everything so I could see her. My brother was at the hospital with me. What I didn't know was the potential of what being bipolar and something like this happening could be. I'm dealing with my own issues, and in 6 weeks, I got to go to London to compete. My grandmother had a stroke, my mom's dead, and my brother's bipolar. It's not a good day. The Lord works in mysterious ways, right? I left, and because it was a hurricane, I neglected to say, I surfed most of my life. So I was always comfortable in the water in hurricanes. So I drove to the beach. And while I was sitting at the beach, looking out into the hurricane, it was a pretty bad hurricane on the East Coast back then, okay? And I'm looking into the water, and I couldn't help but think, that's my life, the hurricane. And I'm paving my way to hell. And I'm in charge, I thought. And what just happened an hour ago shouldn't have happened, because I'm in charge. And I got the biggest slapping from the good Lord that I've ever had in my life. Because, shoot, this morning my mother was okay. She's gone and I can't bring her back. I'm ready to go win a world title. And I'm not in control of a darn thing. And I thought that I was. As I sat there and looked out into the ocean, for the first time, God's not the cloud. He's in the cloud. He's not the fire. He's in the fire, right? He's in the whispering voice. I heard the whispering voice. And the whispering voice said, it's time to change. So your mom's life matters. And I'm like, whoa. What's that even mean? What does it even mean? I didn't know. I didn't have a male role model. Arnold's not the best male role model for a kid to have. And I didn't have one. So I didn't know who to pick to model my life after. So one thing that my mom did do for us, she made sure we went to CCD. We were both baptized, confirmed, and we did go to Mass. We missed sometimes because of my mother's work schedule. But I was baptized, confirmed, First Communion. And I really think that that means a whole lot to a person. Because we're a child of God now. So, I decided that I never read a book. I'm the most uneducated human you've probably ever met. I wanted to quit school, and thankfully I had a principal, because I was in his office a lot. We got along real good, because I was down there all the time. And he liked me because I was good in sports. I could win points for the teams, you know. So we got along really good. So he talked me out of quitting, thankfully. I went to the bookstore, and I was going to buy a Bible because I wanted to learn about this guy, Jesus. Not because he's God, not because of anything, but he may be a good male role model for me. I don't know. And I've never read a book before. Never even opened one. So, me with my giant ego goes into the religious store, goes over to the Bible section, and I find me a nice old King James. Great starter book. And I open to page 1. And struggle? Thou hast that. Whoa. I don't even know who it is. Is it them? Is it... However, remember, God gave me discipline. Page 1 ended up to page 100. Ended up to page 300. I finished it. By myself. No explaining from anybody. Last page of Revelation. Back to page 1, Genesis. What I started to see happen, and I can't explain it any better than this. I don't have a clue what I'm reading yet. I got that old King James Bible that I'm struggling with. But in a certain sense, God tells us that His Word will not enter us void. And I am Exhibit A that it doesn't. I began to change. And I began to change like quite a bit. Hit the pause button. If I was to tell you and give you a multiple answer, A, B, C, I am a former world bodybuilding champion as A. C, I'm an NRA instructor and I shoot competitively. B, I'm a world sumo champion. Which one am I not? A, B, or C? Huh? Sumo. You're wrong. At the same time where we're at in space, right after my mom died, my brother had a breakdown. I went out to the cemetery. 7 days after my mother died, my brother was out there shoveling, trying to dig my mom up. Okay? It was one of the hardest things for me to deal with in my life. I'm hurting. I'm feeding my grandmother every day, and my brother's digging up my mom because he wants to be back together with her. And what the heck do I do? And I'm worried about trying to go win a world title in London. On top of it, I got to go to Japan in 3 days because I got invited to be the first American to compete in the World Sumo Championships. So my life is in absolute chaos, right? And I get there, and on the plane ride, it's a long plane ride. I'm either all in or I'm not in. It's like with faith. Like God doesn't like the lukewarm. You're either all in or you're not. So I get to Tokyo, and I wasn't going to get all that way to do nothing. I got a bronze medal in the World Sumo Championships. And then 6 weeks later, I won the universe. I was starting to have a better life, but there's a whole lot of issues. While I was in Tokyo, I was walking down the street by myself, and you know those big barrels that got the steel straps around them? I see this big guy, big Japanese guy with his arms going in, and he's moving around, and I don't know what he's doing. But I walk up to him, and I look in, and he's got these two things that were like ping pong paddles. And he holds up this perfect white rice ball. And I couldn't help, my life was in such chaos when I'm there with what I just left back home. It's like I'm looking at the barrel of rice, and it's like the chaos of the water again, and then the perfect ball. And in a certain sense, for me at the time, it was God's way of saying, through this chaos, I can work with you. I can work with that mess if you let me. But you got to step aside. And again, I heard that quiet voice, and I listened. I began finally listening, and I started to change more. I joined a Bible study. I started to go into, I got a new Bible that I could read. Oh man, did that change things. Holy cow. One day, James is one of my favorite books. He's a simple guy, and he's a doer. I can relate to that. I'm simple, and I like to do. So I'm at Mass in the morning. I'm not going to get into any details about my fast life, but there were a lot of times that I should have died, and I didn't. And in a certain sense, I'm reading James. James is a doer, and I'm realizing that I got to start doing. But I ain't been to confession yet. So I challenge God. Don't do that, because he'll win. And I basically said, if you want me to go to confession, Father's got to have the whole day free, because I got a lot to say. I go up to Father Kevin after Mass and say, Father Kevin, Mick, do you have time? He says, I have all the time in the world. What do you need? And I looked up, and I'm not joking around. I looked up, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I said, I got to go to confession, but it's going to take the day. Long and short, I got in there, and I said to him, the simple way is I broke all 10 commandments, and I need forgiveness. If I start to try to tell you all my sins, we're going to be here for a few days, and I'm going to forget a whole lot of them. It didn't take a whole lot of time. It took a while. I left there crying like a little baby. When I stood up, I was a new man. The life that God breathed into Adam, Father Kevin breathed into me when I got absolution. And I left there walking on water. I was like Peter, right? And I began to change more. Then I've decided it's time for me to start doing. So I go to Mass in the morning, and I always sit in the front row because I got like ADD. You know, I can't sit still. So I sit in the front row so there's no distractions from me. So as I'm sitting there, at the end of Mass, the religious ed leader, the Dre, says, we're not going to start religious ed because we're short 2 teachers. And unless 2 people come up and teach, we're not going to be able to start. That ain't me. Like, James, do. I'm going home. On my way out the door, it's like a magnet pulled me. And I went over to the woman and I said, I'll take those 2 spots. Oh, how many kids do you have? I said, I don't even like kids. And you want to teach 2 spots? Are you married? Nope. And you want to teach 2 grades? Yep. And it's like, I couldn't get those words back in my mouth. Like, once they got out, that was the end of it. I couldn't get them back in. But I'm either all in or I'm not. I spent time. I got prepared. I was ready. And I taught 3 different grades, 5th, 9th, and 10th for 14 years. Little did I know what God was preparing me for. I'm out of time, but if I can go a couple more minutes, is that okay, Father? You sure? Thank you. This is a real key part of my story. Carla, my wife, I've known most of my life. Carla was married, and her husband died from leukemia. Her brother came over, was talking to me about Carla, and long and short, we ended up having the reception at my house for Carla's husband. And through it, her brother was talking to the 2 of us and was saying, you know, Mick goes to Bible study, and we ended up spending some time with each other. And the time that we ended up spending with each other eventually led to us getting married. Carla was raising her niece because her little sister died from breast cancer. God was giving me experience with children when I was teaching. So when we got married and took in a little 7-year-old girl, I had some experience with kids. God writes straight lines with crooked people, right? One more quickie. A few months back, about a year ago, I was experiencing some major chest stuff going on. I had my physical a week ago, and they told me that everything's great. Cholesterol is 121. My EKG was perfect. Everything's good. I kept having these issues when I exercise every day. I get up, ride my bike, I lift, do my cardio. And I couldn't ride a stationary bike for more than 2 minutes because it hurt too much. My doctor told me that I had indigestion. They treated me for indigestion for a month until one day I couldn't handle the pain anymore. It was so bad. I ended up in the hospital after about 5 hours of excruciating severe pain and not being able to breathe too well. And when they rushed me to another hospital because of how bad a shape I was in, they told me that I may not make the ride because my enzyme levels were so high, my EKG was so off the wall, and they were going to do everything they could so I could make the ride. On the ride, I'm the only one alive in my family. Everybody else has died from heart disease, okay? So it's my turn. On the ride, I was super mellow, saying some Hail Marys, on my death, right? And literally, so the guy says to me that's working on me, I got the pads on me, I got my shirt off, my pads are on me, I got IVs and stuff in me. And he says to me, do you understand the condition you're in right now? Yeah. He said, you seem awful calm for a guy in your shoes. And I looked up, I said, I am. And he says, you understand, you may not make this ride. Yep. And you're okay. Yeah. I said, I'm a guy of faith, man. All my family's gone. And if it's family reunion time and I go home, it's all good. And I have to get this in because it pertains to all of you. My brother, I got a phone call. The one that you don't want to ever get. Another time. My brother was on the bridge, ready to jump. He was suicidal. All I could hear was crying, and I didn't know who it was. It was my brother. He ended up in an institution for a bit. When he was ready to get out, Carl and I go visit him every day. Carl and I go visit him, and they were going to release him, and my brother was afraid to come home. Carla, I'm sitting here. Carla's over here, my brother's over here. And Carla looked at him and just, as quickly as I can say it, you come home with us then. And I got blown away that my wife would let my brother come in and stay with us. And it was the best thing she could do. So my brother came home and he stayed with us. The following morning was Sunday, and I said to him, we go to Mass on Sundays, and all he had was the clothes on his back. So I brought him down some clothes and we went to Mass. Wednesdays was Bible study. My brother started going to Bible study with us. My brother's whole life was I call it mumbo jumbo. You guys probably know what I mean. It wasn't Catholicism. It was everything but. I call it mumbo jumbo. You're playing with mumbo jumbo. You need to stop, But he was always looking for the answer because he was bipolar. After a while, our priest got ChristLife. And we did ChristLife series. I was one of the leaders for it. And my brother partook in it. At the end of the first 7 series of Discovering, my brother sat at my table with a few of my other buddies. And he never spoke. My brother was very quiet. Didn't say a word through the whole thing. On the very last night, our priest stood up and said, does anybody want to share an experience? And all of a sudden, my brother's hand goes up. And Carl is looking at me grab him and don't let him talk. Because he can talk some mumbo jumbo. My brother stood up and for about 10, 15 minutes told everybody in that room, there were about 75 people there, that he's always wanted to die because living is just too hard. And he's never wanted to live because it's so hard every single day, and it would be much easier to die. And you can imagine what that did for me. I used to pray that God would take my brain and give it to my brother so he could enjoy life like I have. My brother stood up, told the story, and he said in front of everybody that night, I'm turning my life over to Jesus with you guys as my witness. And he went on and gave the most beautiful testimony I've ever heard. And Carla was giving me these looks, but Father Peter's standing there with him, and Father Peter's cool, so it's all good. It was Tuesday. We did our ChristLife. Wednesday was Bible study. My brother lost his car key. He comes into Bible study, and he's got a gun case. But it's not my brother wasn't an evil guy at all. He's got a banjo in there. He wants to play some music to us. He had lost his car key, and I had gone over and given the numbers and blah, blah, blah to the car dealership. And after Bible study, I dropped my brother off. And the following day, I'm going to go pick him up and get the key for him so we can get his car back. So my brother has finished ChristLife, gave the best testimony that I could ever give, went to Bible study, went to Mass before Bible study. I left. I come back to pick him up. My brother says to me, I'm going to put on Tchaikovsky and take a nice hot bath. It's my favorite thing in life to do. I'm like, cool. He was in a good place. I went home, sit with Carla, have dinner. I go back to get my brother when I got the key, and I hear the Tchaikovsky music playing. I hear the bathwater running. He must have got up, doing his thing. And I bang on the door. He doesn't hear it, so I let myself in. So I'm yelling to him, nothing. I bang on the bathroom door, and I notice that the bathroom door is hot. So I open the door. My brother had died, doing what he loved to do, listening to his music. He had brought food in the bathtub with him. The water was still running. It was hot. But he'd just given the best testimony I'd ever seen. And the peace, because of ChristLife, because of my brother's experience with it. I sat on the edge of the tub with him. I called my wife first. I said, I got to call 911. I called 911 up, and they're like, stay on the phone with us, sir. We'll get somebody over to help. Ma'am, I'm okay. No, stay on the phone. Ma'am, you don't understand. I'm okay. My brother's gone. My brother's death brought me so much peace, I can't explain it to you. Because I know where he is, because I know what he did. Christ's life for me matters a lot. It's where he changed. If it wasn't for Christ's life, I don't know if he would have. This is a great program. I thank God for it, and I thank you for listening to me.
Mick, thank you for sharing with us, just the beautiful work that the Lord has done in your life. I guess the images that are in my mind from all that you shared is just all of the chaos of your life and how the Lord has just brought it to this beautiful, very ordered place. And it's like the Lord, in the story of creation, just the chaos of the waters, and the Lord just gives shape to it all and draws out from it the beauty of all that he created. But that's what he did for your life. It's what he has done for you. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. It's always beautiful when the truths that we know in our head can take on flesh through someone's life. It's the beauty of testimonies, the beauty of sharing that way. And there are things that you shared tonight that touched some of the hearts here, like in a deeper way. Things that maybe in the midst of his sharing, your heart was saying, Lord, I need you to do that for me, or I want that peace that you gave him as he's riding to the hospital in the ambulance, or after you found your brother. So we're going to move into our time of adoration and worship now. And we want the Lord to have lots of room to work here. And the Lord works in a million different creative ways. And so for some of you, it might be something really specific that Mick shared tonight that opened up something in your own heart. Maybe it was something that he shared that just kind of brought your heart to something else, just something led to another thing. However it is that the Lord is working tonight, we want to give him the room and the freedom to do beautiful things. So we're going to move into a time of adoration. Our musicians, they're going to take us into a time of worship. We'll be there for a little bit. And then what I want to invite you to do, those of you, especially our teens, those of you who've been out to Damascus, we always want to try to find a way to give you a chance to draw a little bit closer to the Lord. And sometimes when we don't have quite as many, I will bring the Lord down in the monstrance and kind of move down along the edges of the pews. But tonight that won't work because there's so many of you that a bunch of you in the middle, there's just no way that you'd be able to even get a little bit closer to Jesus. So we'll do it kind of Damascus style here tonight. And in about 15 or 20 minutes into our time of worship, I'm going to invite you to come up and just to kneel down here. We do have some little kneeling pads. So if that helps to make that possible, do that. If you can't kneel, don't worry, you can stay standing. But with myself and with Father Dan, Pittsburgh priest who's attending in the conference, Father Jeremy, our associate pastor here, what we'll do is we'll just, you guys get lined up, and we're just going to move down the line with the Lord. It won't be long. With all of you, probably about 5-6 seconds. But for the Lord, that's an eternity, right? So that amount of time doesn't matter. But what I invite you to do is, in that moment when the Lord is there before you in the monstrance, just that's your time there face to face with Jesus, for you just to adore him and to love him and to venerate him and to give your heart to him. But in that moment, it's kind of like what we hear in the Gospels often, the woman who said, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I know that he's going to pour out healing. And so I invite you to come up with that kind of faith tonight during that time of worship. That probably will be the bulk of our night because there's a lot of you. You don't have to come up. Don't feel pressure to come up. But we'll move into that after our musicians move us into a time of worship. And then we'll just let the Lord work beautifully there. At the end of the night, and I don't even know what time that'll be now because, we'll just whatever happens. But we do have, maybe there'll be a few prayer teams after the worship is finished. So those of you that feel like, gosh, you know what? I'd like to receive prayer and I'd like to have brothers or sisters praying for me. We'll invite some of them to come up just for prayer ministry at the end as well. So the Lord is so good. Mick, your life is one example of his goodness, but it's multiplied out for every one of us because he loves us deeply and personally. So tonight we'll just invite you to give your hearts over to him as we enter into this time of worship. Some of the songs might be new for some of you. Just follow the lead of our musicians as we give our hearts entirely to the Lord. And if you want a little bit more room during worship, please spread out. There's a lot more room on the two side transepts. And like we shared with you at the conference, as we're praying, we pray with our whole body, right? And so if you feel really, if the right thing during the prayer is just to kneel down and humble yourself, do that. If the right thing is just to stand up and have your arms stretched out before him like we read in the Psalms, do that. But please, freedom tonight, and don't worry about what the people on either side of you are doing. We just want to give our hearts over to the Lord just with great freedom and just entirely tonight as we draw close to him.